He believed loyalty could be purchased, discipline could be enforced, and fear could keep every danger outside his walls. But in the next few seconds, Damien Castellano was about to discover that the rarest kind of courage never came from power. The echo of hurried footsteps rolled across the polished marble courtyard as the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the Castellano estate, a mansion so heavily guarded that most people believed nothing unexpected could ever happen there. Black SUVs waited beside the fountain, security officers spoke quietly through hidden earpieces, and every camera watched every corner with silent precision. It was supposed to be another ordinary afternoon. 8-year-old Emily Castellano skipped across the stone pathway with the carefree excitement only a child could possess, clutching a sketchbook against her chest after finishing another art lesson. Her laughter floated through the warm Chicago air, bright enough to soften even the intimidating walls surrounding her father's empire. Standing several yards away, Claire Brooks adjusted the leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm as she reviewed Damien's afternoon schedule for what felt like the 10th time. She had become known throughout the organization as the secretary who never made mistakes. Every meeting started on time. Every contract was prepared perfectly. Every detail was anticipated before anyone else noticed it. Invisible efficiency had become her greatest strength. Damien rarely looked directly at her. To him, she was simply another professional doing exactly what she had been hired to do. Claire preferred it that way. Remaining unnoticed was always safer than attracting attention in a world ruled by powerful men. Yet that afternoon, something felt strangely wrong. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to notice. It wasn't obvious enough to trigger alarms. It was simply a feeling, born from countless tiny details her disciplined mind refused to ignore. One security vehicle wasn't parked where it usually stood. One radio transmission ended too abruptly. One unfamiliar maintenance van remained outside the front gate longer than scheduled. None of it seemed significant on its own. Together, however, the pieces refused to fit. Claire lifted her eyes from the portfolio and instinctively searched for Emily. The little girl had wandered closer to the garden entrance, completely unaware that every adult around her suddenly appeared distracted by overlapping responsibilities. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Across the courtyard, Damien stepped out of the mansion, surrounded by 2 senior advisors discussing business reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His tailored charcoal suit fit him with effortless precision, his calm expression revealing nothing of the pressure carried by the man many considered untouchable. Conversations paused whenever he appeared. Decisions changed with a single glance from him. He noticed everything, or so everyone believed. Emily bent down to pick up several colored pencils that had slipped from her sketchbook. Claire saw movement from the corner of her eye. Not danger she could name, just motion where there shouldn't have been any. Without thinking, she dropped the portfolio. Pages scattered across the marble as she ran. Her heels struck the stone with sharp urgency, while startled voices called after her. She reached Emily in one desperate movement, wrapped both arms around the little girl, and guided her behind a massive granite planter just as Damien looked up. Time seemed to freeze. Every conversation stopped. Every guard turned at once. Damien's blue eyes locked onto Claire, who knelt on the ground with one arm protectively around his daughter, breathing hard but refusing to let go. Emily looked up in confusion, safe within Claire's embrace, while Claire's steady gaze remained fixed on the open courtyard ahead. For the first time since she had entered his life, Damien Castellano was no longer looking at his secretary. He was looking at the woman who had chosen his daughter's safety before her own future, her career, or even her place inside his carefully controlled world, and in that silent heartbeat, something inside him shifted forever. 3 months earlier, Claire Brooks had walked through the wrought iron gates of the Castellano estate carrying nothing more than a leather briefcase, a carefully organized resume, and a quiet determination never to become the center of anyone's attention. Chicago was a city where powerful names carried invisible weight, and Damien Castellano's name was spoken carefully even among executives who considered themselves fearless. Claire had not accepted the position because of prestige. She had accepted it because stability was something her life had been missing for far too long. The estate manager greeted her with polite professionalism before escorting her through hallways lined with marble columns, priceless artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Everything reflected order, wealth, and discipline. Even the staff moved with measured confidence, speaking softly and avoiding unnecessary conversation. Before Claire reached the executive office, she was given only 3 rules. Never interrupt Mr. Castellano while he was working. Never ask questions about confidential meetings. And never involve yourself in his personal life, especially where his daughter was concerned. Claire listened without argument and nodded once. She had spent years learning that every workplace had invisible boundaries, and respecting them usually meant survival. Damien barely looked up when she entered his office for the first time. He remained focused on several contracts spread across an enormous walnut desk while morning sunlight reflected across polished wood and crystal. His dark-tailored suit matched the quiet authority in his voice. Without offering unnecessary greetings, he simply slid a folder across the desk. Organize the next 2 weeks of meetings, verify every appointment, and remove anything that wastes my time. Claire answered with a calm yes, sir, before leaving without another word. That brief exchange became the pattern of every working day that followed. Damien never raised his voice. He never offered compliments. He expected precision, and Claire quietly delivered it. Within a few weeks, meetings began exactly on schedule, travel plans unfolded without surprises, and confidential documents appeared on his desk moments before he requested them. Employees started noticing that the atmosphere around the executive office had become smoother, although very few realized why. Claire never sought recognition. She believed the best secretary was the one people only noticed when something went wrong, and under her watch almost nothing ever did. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, reviewed overnight correspondence, coordinated schedules across multiple companies, and somehow still found time to leave a fresh cup of black coffee on Damien's desk at precisely 7:30. She never asked how he preferred it. She had quietly observed that he added nothing to it and rarely finished the last sip before another meeting interrupted him. Small observations became silent habits. Damien noticed the results, but rarely considered the person behind them. To him, Claire represented competence, nothing more. Yet there was one detail that quietly disrupted her carefully structured routine. Every afternoon, shortly after school ended, 8-year-old Emily Castellano would pass through the main hallway on her way upstairs. Sometimes she carried books nearly as large as herself. Other days, she clutched drawings covered with colorful stars, flowers, or city skylines. She always smiled at every employee, even those too busy to notice. Most adults answered politely before returning to work. Claire was different. She always looked up from her computer long enough to return the smile. It lasted only a second, but Emily never forgot it. Before long, the little girl began waving every afternoon as though it had become an unwritten tradition. Claire always waved back before returning to her work, careful never to cross the boundaries she had been warned about. She understood the rules perfectly. She simply did not realize that the smallest moments, the ones no one considered important, were already beginning to change the future of everyone living inside the Castellano estate. Weeks passed so quietly that no one inside the Castellano estate noticed the small routine forming between Claire Brooks and Emily Castellano. Every afternoon at exactly 4:15, the front doors opened, and Emily hurried inside carrying a backpack that always seemed too large for her small shoulders. Some days, she bounced through the hallway with endless energy. Other days, she walked more slowly, her smile hidden beneath the weight of another difficult day at school. Claire never asked questions. She simply looked up from her desk, smiled warmly, and greeted the little girl by name. At first, Emily responded with a shy wave before disappearing upstairs. Then the greetings became conversations that lasted 30 seconds. Soon they stretched into a minute or two whenever Damien remained occupied in meetings. Emily loved to show her newest drawings, proudly explaining every tiny detail with the excitement only a child could possess. Claire listened as though every picture belonged in an art gallery. She admired the bright colors, the carefully drawn flowers, and the city skylines that somehow always included a little family standing together beneath a blue sky. One afternoon, Emily quietly admitted that she liked drawing happy families because she barely remembered what life had been like before her mother passed away. The words were spoken so softly that they almost disappeared into the silence of the hallway. Claire felt her heart tighten, but she did not offer empty promises or rehearse sympathy. Instead, she knelt beside the little girl and said that memories could fade, but love had a way of finding new places to live. Emily thought about those words for several seconds before smiling again. From that day forward, she began stopping by Claire's desk almost every afternoon. Sometimes she needed help organizing school papers. Sometimes she wanted someone to admire a science project. Other times, she simply wanted to sit quietly while finishing homework because the executive office felt strangely peaceful compared with the enormous mansion surrounding it. Claire always made sure those visits ended before Damien's schedule brought him back to the office. She remembered the rules she had accepted on her first day and never intended to cross them. She was not trying to replace anyone. She simply recognized loneliness when she saw it because she had carried the same feeling for much of her own life. Damien remained unaware of these brief encounters. His days began before sunrise and often ended long after Emily had gone to bed. Board meetings, negotiations, charity events, and endless responsibilities filled every hour. Whenever he did see his daughter, he made every effort to be present, but even he could not ignore that time had become the one thing money could never purchase. Occasionally, he noticed Emily smiling more than usual at dinner or humming while coloring in the library, yet he assumed she was simply adjusting to another school year. He never imagined that someone inside his own office had quietly become a source of comfort without asking for recognition. Other employees started noticing the change as well. Emily laughed more often. She thanked the kitchen staff after every meal. She even left handwritten notes beside the fresh flowers in the reception area, reminding everyone to have a wonderful day. The mansion, once defined by disciplined silence, slowly felt warmer in subtle ways that no security report or financial statement could ever explain. Claire never claimed responsibility for any of it. She continued arriving early, organizing schedules with flawless precision, and leaving the office exactly as quietly as she had entered it months before. She believed kindness did not need an audience. The smallest gestures often carried the greatest weight, even when no one important seemed to notice them. She did not realize that someone else had already begun watching from a distance, quietly observing patterns that everyone else dismissed as ordinary, and those unnoticed observations would soon change every carefully balanced routine inside the Castellano estate. The following Monday began like every other day inside the Castellano estate, perfectly organized on the surface and quietly complicated beneath it. Claire Brooks reviewed travel confirmations, adjusted meeting schedules after an unexpected conference call, and coordinated security clearances for several visitors arriving before noon. Everything appeared routine until she noticed a single name missing from the daily security roster. One driver assigned to Emily's afternoon pickup had been replaced overnight. The change itself was not unusual. People became sick. Families had emergencies. Schedules shifted. What unsettled Claire was that no explanation accompanied the update. She glanced at the digital log again before making a quick call to the transportation office. The supervisor politely explained that the replacement had been approved through normal procedures. Claire thanked him and ended the call, yet the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. Later that morning, while organizing documents near the executive entrance, she watched a white maintenance van remain outside the front gate for nearly 20 minutes. The estate welcomed deliveries every day, but vehicles rarely stayed idle. Eventually, the van drove away without entering the property. Claire quietly asked one of the reception assistants whether maintenance work had been scheduled. The answer was no. She made a brief note inside her planner and continued working. During lunch, she walked toward the staff cafeteria and noticed another detail that most people would have ignored. One exterior surveillance camera facing the East Garden was temporarily offline for routine software updates. The technician assured everyone it would be restored shortly. Claire smiled politely, although she wondered why the update had been scheduled during the busiest part of the afternoon instead of overnight. By the time Emily returned from school, Claire had already collected several tiny observations that made no sense individually, but formed an uncomfortable pattern together. Emily arrived carrying another sketchbook and immediately hurried toward Claire's desk with an excited grin. "Look what I finished," she said as she opened a colorful drawing of a lighthouse standing against a stormy sky. Claire admired every careful pencil stroke before gently asking whether anything unusual had happened at school. Emily thought for a moment before mentioning that she had noticed the same dark sedan parked near the entrance 3 different afternoons that week. The little girl laughed afterward, explaining that maybe the driver simply liked waiting there because the trees gave good shade. Claire smiled, but another quiet alarm sounded inside her mind. Children often noticed details adults overlooked because they were not yet trained to ignore ordinary things. After Emily disappeared upstairs with her tutor, Claire walked directly to the head of security. She carefully explained everything she had observed without exaggeration or emotion. The changed driver, the unfamiliar van, the inactive camera, and Emily's comment about the sedan. The security chief listened patiently before offering a reassuring smile. He thanked Claire for being attentive, but explained that the estate operated under multiple layers of protection. Vehicle replacements were verified. Camera maintenance followed approved schedules. Delivery vehicles occasionally became lost. As for a parked sedan outside a school, there could be dozens of harmless explanations. Claire nodded respectfully because she understood his reasoning. On paper, every detail appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet deep inside, her instincts continued whispering that ordinary events rarely arrived all at once. That evening, while Damien reviewed financial reports in his office, Claire quietly placed the final folder on his desk. She almost mentioned her concerns, but stopped herself. He had trusted, experienced professionals to protect his family.
She was only his secretary.
Instead, she wished him a good evening and walked toward the exit. Before leaving the estate, she glanced one final time across the peaceful courtyard where Emily's laughter echoed through the gardens as the setting sun painted everything in warm golden light. It looked like the safest place in the world, but Claire could not shake the feeling that calm sometimes arrived just before everything changed. The next afternoon unfolded with the same comforting rhythm that had defined life inside the Castellano estate for years. Warm sunlight spilled across the gardens, the fountain shimmered beneath a cloudless sky, and security officers followed their familiar routines with quiet confidence. Damien Castellano was concluding a high-level meeting inside the executive wing, while Claire Brooks finalized several contracts that needed his signature before the end of the day. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, yet the uneasy feeling that had followed Claire since the previous morning refused to leave. She glanced through the office window toward the courtyard just as Emily stepped outside carrying her sketchbook. The little girl had convinced her tutor to spend a few extra minutes drawing flowers near the fountain before returning indoors. Claire smiled briefly before noticing something that made her heartbeat slow instead of race. Emily's tutor had been called away by a member of the household staff only moments earlier, leaving the little girl standing alone for what was supposed to be less than a minute. At almost the same time, one of the security officers received an urgent radio message and hurried toward the front entrance. Another guard turned to assist with an arriving delivery vehicle. The changes lasted only seconds, but together they created a gap that should never have existed. Claire rose from her desk without realizing she had already abandoned the reports in her hands. Through the glass, she saw a stranger near the garden path, dressed like a contractor carrying a clipboard. Nothing about his appearance seemed threatening. He walked calmly, smiled politely, and looked exactly like someone who belonged there. Even so, Claire immediately recognized that she had never seen him before despite memorizing nearly every employee and approved vendor who entered the estate. Her instincts spoke before logic could interrupt. She hurried into the hallway, calling Emily's name with calm urgency. The little girl looked up, surprised but smiling, believing Claire simply wanted to see another drawing. Instead of answering, Claire quickened her pace. The stranger slowed for the briefest moment before turning away as though changing directions. Claire reached Emily just as another security officer emerged from the opposite side of the courtyard, finally noticing the unfamiliar visitor. Within moments, The man quietly walked back toward the service entrance without argument, disappearing before anyone could ask further questions. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. No one shouted. No one ran. Nothing dramatic appeared to happen. To everyone else, it looked like an ordinary misunderstanding. Emily blinked with innocent confusion as Claire gently rested both hands on her shoulders. "Are we in trouble?" she asked softly. Claire smiled, brushed a loose strand of hair away from the little girl's face, and answered, "Not at all. I just think your father would like you closer to the house today." Emily accepted the explanation without another question and slipped her small hand into Claire's as they walked back together across the courtyard. At that exact moment, Damien stepped outside after finishing his meeting. He stopped halfway down the stone staircase as he watched Claire guiding Emily toward the mansion with quiet composure. He noticed something unusual in his secretary's expression. She was calm on the outside, but her eyes were carefully scanning every corner of the estate as though measuring risks no one else had considered. Before Damien could ask what had happened, the head of security approached with a reassuring report explaining that an unauthorized contractor had mistakenly entered through the wrong service gate and had already been escorted away after a simple identity verification. The explanation sounded reasonable. Every member of the security team accepted it immediately. Damien gave a brief nod and prepared to return inside. Only Claire remained unconvinced. As she looked back toward the empty garden path, she realized the stranger had never once appeared surprised to be questioned. Instead, he had looked directly at Emily before quietly leaving, as though confirming something he had come to see, and the certainty settling inside Claire's heart told her this peaceful afternoon had not been the end of anything. It had only been the beginning. The following morning began under gray skies that covered Chicago with a blanket of quiet stillness. Rain clouds drifted above the Castellano estate, softening the sunlight that usually filled the gardens. Claire Brooks arrived before anyone else, determined to convince herself that the previous afternoon had been nothing more than an unfortunate coincidence. Yet as she unlocked her office and reviewed the overnight security reports, one detail immediately caught her attention. There was no official record of the unidentified contractor who had entered the property. Every approved visitor had been documented. Every delivery had been logged. Every employee had signed in. The stranger who had stood only yards from Emily had vanished from the paperwork as though he had never existed. Claire frowned, reading the report twice before quietly closing the folder. She considered bringing the inconsistency directly to Damien, but another part of her reminded her that she had already questioned the security team once. Without solid evidence, she risked appearing overly suspicious. Instead, she carried on with the day's responsibilities, organizing conference calls and preparing briefing materials for a meeting scheduled that afternoon. Shortly after lunch, Damien informed his staff that he would be leaving the estate for a private meeting across town. Before stepping into the waiting vehicle, he paused beside Emily, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I will be back before dinner, sweetheart. Stay inside, if the weather gets worse." Emily smiled and promised she would. It was one of the rare moments Claire had witnessed between father and daughter, brief but sincere, revealing a warmth Damien rarely allowed anyone else to see. Less than an hour later, the rain finally arrived, tapping softly against the enormous windows overlooking the courtyard. Emily finished her piano lesson and wandered toward the covered terrace with her sketchbook, fascinated by the reflections dancing across the wet stone paths. Claire happened to glance outside while answering a telephone call and immediately noticed the little girl standing alone near the edge of the terrace. At almost the same moment, she saw a service gate slowly swing open after a delivery truck exited the property. One maintenance worker hurried to secure it, but before the gate fully closed, another unfamiliar figure appeared beyond the entrance, lingering just long enough to study the estate before stepping back out of sight. Claire did not wait for an explanation. She placed the telephone receiver down without finishing the conversation and walked swiftly toward Emily. The little girl looked up, with a cheerful smile, holding out a fresh drawing of the rain-covered gardens. Claire accepted the picture, but her attention remained fixed beyond the terrace, where the partially open gate was beginning to close. Then Emily noticed something rolling across the wet pavement. A bright red balloon, carried by the wind from outside the estate, drifted gently through the narrow opening before the gate latched shut. Laughing with innocent excitement, Emily instinctively took several quick steps toward it. Claire reacted before conscious thought could catch up. She reached Emily in one smooth movement, wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders, and guided her backward just as the balloon slipped beyond reach. Emily looked up in surprise. "But I almost had it," she said with quiet disappointment. Claire knelt beside her, smiling warmly despite the tension she still felt. "Some things look beautiful because they are meant to distract us," she whispered softly. The little girl considered those words before nodding, allowing Claire to lead her safely back toward the house. Minutes later, Damien unexpectedly returned after his meeting had been cancelled by the weather. As he stepped inside the front entrance, he saw Claire still holding Emily's hand while the little girl happily described the balloon she almost chased into the rain. Damien remained silent. He had hired Claire to manage schedules and correspondence, yet twice within 2 days he had found her instinctively placing herself between his daughter and situations no one else had considered dangerous. For reasons he could not fully explain, he no longer believed those instincts were simply coincidences. That evening, long after most of the lights inside the Castellano estate had dimmed, Damien remained alone in his office, unable to focus on the contracts spread across his walnut desk. Numbers that normally demanded his complete attention blurred together, while the same image replayed in his mind. Claire reaching Emily, without hesitation. Claire noticing details no one else had questioned. Claire protecting his daughter with an instinct that could not be explained by a job description. He had built his entire life on reading people correctly within moments of meeting them. Yet somehow, the quiet woman working only a few feet outside his office had become the one person he understood the least. Without announcing his intentions, Damien called Vincent, the head of his private intelligence team. "I want a complete background review on Claire Brooks. Everything. Family, education, previous employment, financial history. Leave nothing out." Vincent simply answered, "You will have it by morning." By sunrise, a thick folder rested on Damien's desk. He expected to find hidden motives, unexplained wealth, suspicious connections, or at least some reason to justify the unusual concern Claire showed toward Emily. Instead, every page dismantled the assumptions he had quietly built. Claire had grown up in a modest neighborhood outside Indianapolis. Her father had been a public school science teacher. Her mother worked as a pediatric nurse for nearly 3 decades. Neither had accumulated wealth or influence. Both had been known throughout their community for volunteering whenever families faced difficult times. Then Damien reached a newspaper clipping preserved inside the report. It described a tragic highway accident that had occurred when Claire was only 12 years old. Her parents had not survived. Claire herself had escaped with only minor injuries because a passing stranger had pulled her from the vehicle moments before emergency responders arrived. The rescuer had disappeared before anyone learned his name. Damien continued reading in silence. After losing her parents, Claire had been raised by her grandmother, a retired librarian who taught her that gratitude was measured through actions rather than words. According to former teachers, Claire volunteered at children's hospitals throughout high school. During college, she mentored younger students and spent weekends reading books to children recovering from serious illnesses. Every reference described the same qualities: calm under pressure, deeply compassionate, unusually observant, never seeking recognition. Damien leaned back slowly, surprised by the unfamiliar weight settling across his shoulders. He had expected secrets. Instead, he found quiet integrity repeated year after year. Another page contained a recommendation letter from Claire's former employer, the chief executive officer of a nonprofit foundation. It included one sentence that refused to leave Damien's mind. "Claire has an extraordinary habit of noticing the person everyone else accidentally overlooks." He read the line again before closing the folder. Suddenly, Emily's brighter smile over the past several months made perfect sense. So did the handwritten notes left for the household staff and the peaceful atmosphere that had gradually settled over the estate. None of those changes had happened by accident. They had quietly grown around one woman who believed kindness did not require permission. Later that afternoon, Damien watched Claire through the glass wall of his office as she patiently helped Emily organize colored pencils before gently reminding the little girl that homework came before drawing. Emily laughed, pretending to complain, but followed every instruction with complete trust. Claire never noticed Damien observing them because her full attention remained on the child beside her. There was no performance in her actions, no expectation of praise, and no attempt to impress anyone. She behaved exactly the same whether she believed someone was watching or not. For the first time in many years, Damien questioned his own judgment rather than someone else's. He had spent months seeing Claire as an efficient employee because efficiency was all he had looked for. He had never stopped to ask who she truly was. As Emily hugged Claire before running upstairs with her sketchbook, Damien quietly realized that the greatest strength inside his carefully guarded world had never worn a tailored suit, carried authority, or commanded respect through fear. It had been sitting just outside his office all along, answering emails with one hand while gently protecting the heart of his family with the other. The atmosphere inside the Castellano estate began changing in ways that no architect could have designed and no security protocol could have predicted. It happened gradually, almost invisibly, through moments so ordinary that most people never realized they were witnessing something remarkable. Damien Castellano no longer walked past Claire Brooks without acknowledging her presence. His greetings remained brief, but they were genuine. A quiet good morning replaced silent nods. A simple thank you followed every completed report. For everyone else in the organization, those small words meant very little. For employees who had worked beside Damien for years, they meant everything. Claire noticed the difference but never commented on it. She simply continued doing her work with the same calm professionalism that had defined her from the beginning. One morning, Damien reviewed Emily's upcoming school calendar while waiting for a conference call to begin. Without looking up, he asked Claire whether the Science Museum field trip scheduled for Friday sounded worthwhile. The question caught her completely by surprise. Until then, he had never requested her opinion on anything unrelated to business. Claire studied the itinerary before smiling gently. I think Emily would remember a day discovering something new far longer than another afternoon indoors. Damien looked at the papers for another moment before quietly telling his assistant to clear his schedule that Friday afternoon. He intended to attend the trip himself. When Emily learned that her father would be joining her class, she nearly dropped her breakfast spoon in excitement. The entire dining room filled with laughter that morning, and several longtime staff members exchanged surprised glances. They had not heard the mansion sound that alive in years. Days later, another unexpected change quietly unfolded. Emily approached Damien after dinner carrying two drawings. One showed a towering office building beneath gray clouds. The other displayed the same building surrounded by flowers, sunlight, and smiling people. "Which one do you like better, Daddy?" she asked. Damien examined both pictures carefully before pointing toward the brighter one. Emily smiled proudly. "That is because Miss Claire says buildings feel different when the people inside them choose kindness." Damien looked across the room toward Claire, who had been organizing documents on a nearby table. She immediately looked slightly embarrassed, worried she had overstepped by offering life lessons to his daughter. Instead of correcting her, Damien folded the drawings carefully and said, "I think Miss Claire is right." The word surprised everyone, including Claire herself. From that evening forward, Emily naturally included Claire in more family moments. She asked her to help choose books from the library, to taste homemade cookies prepared by the kitchen staff, and to watch piano recitals before bedtime. Claire always accepted with quiet humility while remaining careful never to replace the role that belonged to Damien. She simply filled the empty spaces left by busy schedules with patience and encouragement. Damien watched those moments more often than anyone realized. He noticed Emily becoming more confident, laughing more freely, and speaking openly about school instead of hiding worries behind polite smiles. He also noticed Claire never accepted praise without redirecting attention back toward Emily. If the little girl completed a difficult assignment, Claire celebrated her effort. If Emily learned a new song on the piano, Claire applauded every note as though performing inside a concert hall. Nothing Claire did seemed extraordinary on its own. Yet together, Those countless small moments transformed the emotional heartbeat of the estate. One quiet evening, after most employees had gone home, Damien found Claire placing fresh flowers into a simple glass vase near the front entrance. They had been delivered for an executive meeting that had ended hours earlier. Most people would have thrown them away. Claire arranged them beside the staircase instead. Damien asked why she bothered with something so small. Claire smiled softly before answering, "Sometimes the smallest beautiful things remind people they are finally home." Damien looked around the mansion he had spent years protecting with wealth, influence, and endless layers of security. For the first time, he understood that a house could be defended by power, but only kindness could ever make it feel like a home. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees surrounding the Castellano estate in shades of amber and crimson while cool winds carried the promise of another Chicago winter. Life inside the mansion continued with its familiar rhythm, yet anyone who had worked there long enough could feel that something fundamental had changed. The atmosphere no longer revolved entirely around schedules, security briefings, and business decisions. Laughter now echoed through hallways that had once been defined by silence. Fresh flowers appeared near the entrance every Monday morning. Emily's colorful drawings decorated a corner of the family library, and no one dared remove them because Damien himself had framed the first picture she proudly gave him after their museum trip. One crisp morning, Claire Brooks arrived carrying her usual leather portfolio, expecting another day of meetings and correspondence. As she approached the executive office, she noticed the door standing open. Damien was already inside, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows as sunlight reflected across the city skyline beyond Lake Michigan. Without turning around, he spoke in the calm voice that everyone inside his organization recognized immediately. "Good morning, Claire." She paused for only a moment before answering with the same quiet professionalism she had always shown.
"Good morning, sir."
She placed the day's schedule on his desk and began explaining several changes requested by investors arriving later that afternoon. Damien listened carefully before closing the folder without reading another page. Instead, he asked a question that surprised her. "How is Emily's science project coming along?" Claire smiled without hesitation. "She finished the model last night. She is excited to show you after school." Damien nodded thoughtfully. "Then I should make sure I am home on time." It was such a simple sentence, yet Claire immediately recognized how different it was from the man she had first met months earlier. The Damien who hired her would have measured success by completed negotiations and signed contracts. The man standing before her now quietly rearranged million-dollar meetings, so he would not miss a school presentation created from cardboard, glue, and paint. As Claire turned to leave, Damien stopped her once more.
"Claire."
It was the first time he had spoken only her name without attaching her title. She looked back, slightly surprised. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the reports. Not for the schedules. Thank you for seeing what I was too busy to notice." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Claire lowered her eyes modestly before answering with complete sincerity. "Emily already had everything she needed, sir. She only needed more time with her father." Damien stood silently after she left the office, allowing those words to settle deeper than any business advice he had ever received. That afternoon, he arrived home before sunset. Emily ran across the front lawn carrying her finished science project while laughing so hard she nearly dropped it. Damien caught the display with one hand and his daughter with the other before they both laughed together beneath the golden autumn sky. Claire watched quietly from the front steps, preparing to leave for the evening without interrupting the family moment. Emily suddenly waved her over. "Miss Claire, come look. We built it together." Claire walked closer, admiring every carefully painted detail while Damien looked from the model to his daughter and finally toward Claire. Months earlier, he had believed he was hiring an exceptional secretary. Standing there beneath the fading sunlight, he understood he had welcomed something far more valuable into his life. Not because she had organized his business better. Not because she had protected his daughter when instinct told her something was wrong. But because she had quietly reminded a powerful man that the greatest responsibility was never building an empire. It was building a home where the people you loved felt seen, protected, and cherished every single day. As evening settled over the estate and warm lights glowed behind every window, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress standing against the world. It felt like a family finding its way back to one another, and on that peaceful autumn evening, Damien Castellano finally understood that true strength was never measured by authority or influence. It was measured by the quiet courage to care when no one expected you to, and that was the day everyone inside the Castellano estate remembered what dignity, compassion, and love truly looked like.